Okay, so the next thing that we need to understand is how energy moves through an ecosystem actually depends on how efficiently any consumer uses it at any given trophic level. And so in this module, we're going to talk about efficiencies, which sounds a lot like accounting. And in truth, that's essentially what we're doing as ecologists, is acting like economists of a natural system. So last week we learned how consumers relate to each other and to primary producers. And now we're going to get much more quantitative about those relationships. We're going to start thinking about how energy is transported between primary producers and the primary consumers or secondary consumers through quantitative diagrams called energy pyramids. So energy pyramids reflect the total amount of energy that exists at any given trophic level. And so in this image, we're showing you something that looks like a pyramid, a food pyramid, and in fact, we're showing you what we call a trophic pyramid. A trophic pyramid is a chart that's composed of these stacked rectangles. And the stacked rectangles are sized such that they represent the amount of energy or the biomass in each trophic group. Okay? So these are providing you with concrete quantitative information. And so a pyramid of energy would represent the amount of energy in each trophic level, whereas the biomass pyramid would represent how much biomass or standing crop of organisms are present at any given trophic group. So that's what we're showing you here in this figure. So when these food pyramids are based on primary producers that have different rates of net primary productivity, then what we're going to see is that across ecosystems, we're going to see different shapes of energy pyramids and biomass pyramids. So here's an image that you can see that describes energy in the left column of pyramids and biomass in the right column of pyramids. On the top row of pyramids, those represent terrestrial ecosystems, and the bottom row of pyramids, that represents aquatic ecosystems. And these are, of course, generalized, averaged across many studies and many ecosystems that are either terrestrial or aquatic. But it's going to give us this idea of what's going on. And so what you can see in the terrestrial ecosystem pyramid, that is for the energy pyramid, you can see, and it's consistent with the biomass pyramid of the terrestrial ecosystem, that a vast majority of both energy and biomass in a terrestrial ecosystem resides in the producers. That's that darkest green color. That's why we see so much green stuff all around. We need a lot of green stuff in order to support the consumer levels of the pyramids. And so you can see that, in fact, we have incredible amounts of biomass, and that biomass of the primary producers is storing a significant amount of energy. In contrast, tertiary consumers, I'm thinking about wolves or top predators, lions, they represent a very small amount of the biomass in an ecosystem, a very small amount. And it's proportional. This is a proportional amount relative to the producers. So if you take out the plants, you're going to take out that capacity for the ecosystem to support tertiary consumers in terms of numbers, absolute numbers. Now the aquatic ecosystem pyramids are kind of interesting. Again, for energy, the energy pyramid is incredibly similar to that of the terrestrial ecosystem. There's a lot of energy stored in primary producers, and those primary producers represent not only a lot of energy, but they support consumers that represent smaller and smaller amounts of energy within them, depending on the level of consumer. But what's interesting is that in very, 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 very high primary production conditions. So this is an unusual circumstance that they're showing here, but in very productive ecosystems. I'm thinking about hot spots of energy associated with aquatic ecosystems, those areas that are upwellings, those areas that have extremely high net primary productivity, so swamps or coral reefs, then what we see is an inverted biomass pyramid, which is like so wild because this is not what we were expecting. So producers in those aquatic ecosystems that are very high productivity represent a very small amount of the biomass, very small amount of the biomass. So think about a coral reef. A very small amount of that biomass in a coral reef is represented by algae. And those algae are embedded in the zooxanthellae in those corals, right? Very small biomass. And those primary producers support increasingly heavier, weightier consumers, such that it's the tertiary consumers in a very high productivity, high primary productivity in aquatic environment that actually represent the most biomass. It's so weird. But generally, if you're looking at lower productivity aquatic ecosystems, then the biomass pyramid looks exactly the same as the as the energy pyramid. Okay, so this is a very special condition indeed for this bottom pyramid. That doesn't happen in all aquatic ecosystems. So how do we make these trophic cascades or these trophic pyramids incredibly efficient? And the way that we do that is by thinking very carefully about how digestion occurs. And I know that sounds weird because you're like, oh, that's the grossest thing ever, Leslie. You're showing me a beautiful snowy white owl with a vole in it, and that vole is gonna be lunch. But that vole is contributing to there's a huge vole biomass that's contributing to maintaining the biomass of that snowy owl. And ultimately, some of that vole is not going to be digested and assimilated into the bone structure or the feather structure or the meat structure of that snowy owl. Some of it is going to be regurgitated in a pellet. And that may be true for owls or any consumer. Some of it does not get consumed. If you produce waste after consuming something, I don't care whether it's a cow patty or some weird little trim of, leaf biomass that's died because somebody has eaten a part of it and the leaf has fallen off. Whatever the waste is from consumers consuming either primary producers or a lower consumer, we are losing efficiency in the ability to convert the energy that is stored in the prey and assimilating it into our bodies. So the efficiency of these trophic pyramids is limited by both consumption and assimilation efficiency. So these food chains are limited by their efficiency. And I want to recognize a few vocab words that I've been describing here. Consumption efficiency is the percentage of the percentage of energy or biomass in a trophic level that is consumed by the next higher trophic level. Any energy that is not consumed is waste, right? So it can be consumed, but some bones will be lost, right? So if you have bones, you're not going to be actually consuming and digesting those. Those are going to be lost in the process. Another thing that might be lost is, let's imagine a caterpillar is eating a sunflower from the stem out. It might never eat the outside part of the stem. It might just dig a hole right through the stem of the sunflower because that is the softest part. So again, that would be left behind and waste. Now, assimilation efficiency is the amount of the energy that is actually assimilated and builds parts of the body that creates growth and reproduction. So, for instance, some of the material consumed might be respired, right? And that respiration process is a net loss in the assimilation efficiency. And finally, net production efficiency is a term where we describe the percent of the assimilated energy that is actually used for growth and reproduction. There's a whole pile of other activities that you could be doing if you're not growing or reproducing, right? You could be walking around, you could be pooping, you could be doing a whole pile of stuff. That is not part of the net production efficiency. And so these terms all contribute to food chain efficiency, or sometimes it's termed ecological efficiency. And essentially, ecological efficiency is the percentage of net production from one trophic level compared to the next trophic level. And so you can see how efficient it is by the difference in the width of those levels. Remember those rectangles that create the pyramid? So the difference in the rectangle lengths will represent the degree to which the system is not efficient. So here's a picture of a fish eating another fish. And it represents this idea that a lot of aquatic ecosystems begin with these small herbivores. This fish will have been an herbivore, and that herbivore will have consumed, little algae. Maybe zooplankton too, but algae often. The zooplankton will consume the algae as well, and then the zooplankton will be consumed by maybe this fish as well as larger fish. So aquatic ecosystems we begin with small herbivores, so like zooplankton, and they are consumed by small fish that are consumed by larger fish. Now what's key is how long the material consumed remains in a given trophic level, and we call that energy residence time. You'll find that in the textbook. Energy residence time is the length of time that energy remains in a given trophic level. So how long does the energy of zooplankton live in this guy's trophic level versus how quickly is it converted into this trophic level, or how quickly is it lost as waste? We can do the same with biomass. So there's something called biomass residence time, and essentially that's the length of time that biomass remains in a given trophic level. So this little fish will have gained biomass by consuming zooplankton, and the biomass that the zooplankton contribute to the biomass of that little fish will make it fatter, right? But that biomass can either be transferred up a trophic level or it can be lost. And biomass residence time measures the length of time that biomass remains in a given trophic level. We can also measure the residency time for dead organic material, whether it's in a water system or whether it's in a terrestrial system. So in aquatic ecosystems, for instance, we can imagine algae live for a while and then they die, and when they die they float, they sink to the bottom of the lake, and we can quantify how long that dead algae lives at the bottom of the lake, or the dead fish, or the dead zooplankton, versus sometimes that dead algae gets converted into, I don't know, the biomass of a primary producer because it's been decomposed and now there's free nitrogen just waiting to be used by the next aquatic plant that comes along. Okay. There also is a huge amount of energy that goes into measuring residency times for dead organic matter. I think we're going to talk about that in the future, but essentially what we do, just to make sure that I'm covering this, is literally people will go out and measure how long these leaves or the trunks of trees or the branches, how long they remain in this place, how much biomass remains in that place for how long, okay? Yeah, it's kind of wild to imagine doing this. And so the practice of doing this work, of measuring how nutrients move through ecosystems and how that is influenced by ecological interactions, is called ecological stoichiometry. So if you want to do this kind of work in the future, you would be a stoichiometrist, which is kind of cool. And in fact, my first roommate at a field station, this is what she did, was she measured how nutrients moved through ecosystems, especially because she was really interested in trying to understand how leaf litter and the dead woody debris that falls to the ground, how much of a carbon sink it is, and for how long does the carbon remain in that material, or how quickly does it disappear and go back into the air. Really important stuff for understanding the global carbon budget.